Thanks everyone for joining. This is online meetup number 6. It's been a few months since we've had our last meetup, and thanks for your patience. Hope everybody is healthy and well. Today we're going to actually talk a lot about WebAssembly. So our agenda today, we're going to do a little quick recap for those who may be new to Envoy and WebAssembly, but we're going to give a little recap on what's been going on with WebAssembly support in the Envoy project and some of the tools that Solo team has been working on building for the community. And then we also have a couple of demos today from some folks in the community around some of the extensions that they've built. So I'm really excited about that. Turns out they're both security modules. And then we have a community Q&A. What we're going to do here is there's been a good amount of questions that have come up in the community Slack related to WebAssembly. So what I wanted to do was kind of recap them all for the folks on the meetup in case you may have missed the thread in Slack. So we've got about 5 questions that we've pulled from the community Slack that we'll have the engineering team here answer, and then we'll talk a little bit about like what's currently in development specifically for like WebAssembly Hub from Solo, and then also get some feedback from the folks on the phone on different things that you may be interested in. So for today's meetup, we've got myself, Betty Junod. I'll be hosting this meetup today, and then we've got Yuval Kohavi, our chief architect, Scott Weiss, one of our senior engineers, and then Shane O'Donnell, who's actually the newest member of the Solo team here today. So let's kick it off here with a little bit of recap on what is WebAssembly. Yuval, you want to?
Yeah, so WebAssembly actually came from the browser environment where they wanted to allow languages that are not JavaScript to run in the browser. So it's essentially a binary format for instructions, not unlike the JVM, if you're familiar with that allows you to compile many languages into that format with the original goal of running it inside your browser. Now, this technology of a WASM VM or WASM sandbox is not limited to the browser. You can take a code of a WASM VM and integrate it with whatever application you write. And that's exactly the work that's done in Envoy. They're integrating a WebAssembly VM into Envoy with the goal of allowing you to extend Envoy in a way that doesn't require rebuilding it. So you can grab Envoy from the upstream Docker image, and together with WASM, just attach your WASM module into the Envoy without the need to rebuilding it. Because currently today, extending Envoy does require rebuilding it and requires familiarity with C++ and Bazel. So WASM is the solution for this that allows you to get your code, doesn't matter which language, into a WASM model, and then from a WASM model into Envoy.
Next slide, people.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm driving the slide, so let me know when y'all would like the next one.
Yeah. So if we talk a little bit about Envoy extensions, as the request flows through Envoy, right? So a request coming from a downstream, like a browser or a phone app, going into Envoy on the edge of the data center, and then goes into the upstream, your app inside the data center or the cloud. It travels through Envoy in what's called the filter chain. And for example, in the before here, you can see that we have a bunch of filters that can manipulate the request. So we can do auth, rate limiting, handle gRPC, or whatever custom logic you want to add there. So Envoy is extendable in the sense that you can write new filters and add them to the Envoy filter chain to do additional functionality. So for example, with Solo, we have our own distribution of Envoy, and we have a transformation filter that allows you to transform JSON to other things. So if you have an old upstream that doesn't accept JSON, you can use that to transform it. The filters today are required to be written in C++, and you cannot load them as a shared library. They have to be built into Envoy, which means that you have to compile Envoy from scratch using Bazel. And then you have to distribute this new image to be used in your solution, right? And that also means you have to keep track of, for example, Envoy security releases, because you have to do this process of rebuilding all over again to get the latest updates. With the WebAssembly approach, it's different. You're going to use upstream Envoy. You're going to compile your code into WebAssembly, and we try to provide some tooling to make that easier and also make distribution easier. And what they've done in Envoy technically is to write a C++ filter that what it does is actually load your WASM code and proxy the C++ calls into the WASM module, right? So in the after model, we'll be using upstream Envoy directly from Docker Hub, and we'll configure it to load our WebAssembly module from wherever it is. If it can be on the same container, or it can be in an HTTP server, or for example, we have WebAssembly Hub for exactly this type of distribution problem. And when Envoy receives the module, it'll activate, it'll be in the chain, and the request will go through that module, which means that you can influence the behavior of every request that's going through Envoy without recompiling it, essentially. Yeah, Betty, anything else you think I should mention here?
No, sorry, and I just like advanced the slide for you.
Yeah.
So with that, thanks for that recap, Yuval, to just kind of explain how these things work. And I think one of the things that with this is that there's a lot of different terminology out there, and shorthand, as well as like, shorthand, the acronyms and what have you. So I wanted to, if Scott Weiss, I'm going to unmute you. If you can kind of give a little overview.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Betty.
Help explain this.
Hey, everybody. So I'm not sure, based on the audience, who here would be more knowledgeable about WASME and the WebAssembly Hub. Maybe some people are here more because they know about Envoy and WASM, like what you've always just discussing. So I guess I'll help with this slide to disambiguate some of that stuff. We have, so we're starting with WebAssembly. WebAssembly is, like you've all described, it's the actual instruction format itself, we're finding lots of applications. There are lots of different runtimes that can utilize WASM, and we're seeing new use cases come up for it. Like, I think Open Policy Agent is another project that's considering talking about or started implementing support for using WASM modules to allow users to, define policies imperatively rather than declaratively. Then you have Envoy WASM. Envoy WASM is the public Envoy project, which is doing the experimental work and sort of the pioneering work before things get brought into the main Envoy repo. So now we're talking about what Solo has actually built. What Solo has built is two things. So we have the WebAssembly Hub, which is a public storage backend for managing WASM modules, like Docker Hub would be for Docker images. So what we've done, this coupled with WASME, as well as the backend components that we've built, basically give you the ability to today, either using Glue or Istio, you can deploy WASM modules that you built locally. And what we do is with this tool WASME that you see on there, we use this to package a WASM module, the actual binary, into an OCI image, like a Docker image, that you can then store in an image registry and version it, and it has a checksum. And we have components that run on the server side that know how to pull from a registry. So I hope that clarifies the relationship between the WebAssembly hub, which is the backend server from which images can be pulled, and WASME, which is the front-end CLI that you use to build those images and test them, as well as publish them.
Thank you. And then since we initially launched this in December, and we had an update in March of this year, and I was just checking this the other day, and there's over 200 community repos available. So this is it's pretty exciting to see folks get interested, and also especially building something and then sharing, so that other people can see the examples, play with it, and then maybe that inspires them to build, try building something else. But I thought this was good because there's a lot of people use the shorthand, and then sometimes it could get a little confusing as to like what is what. And so Scott, you want to talk a little bit about this the flow?
Sure. So this is a brief rundown of the user experience. So what does it actually mean from a usage point of view when you're using these components, the WebAssembly Hub and WASME, to add, let's say you want a custom behavior, like Yuval was describing. You want to add something to your filter chain. You want to add a custom filter that's going to apply some logic or behavior on the request path. Data is coming in and out of Envoy. You want to put a filter on that somehow. So what do? You write a module in any language. There's a certain interface that, so there's an interface that Envoy exposes, which is a bit more low level. And then there's an interface that WASME exposes, which is a little bit higher level, more user-friendly. And we've provided libraries for each language. And you can also build your own modules directly, not using the WASME libraries. And then you can package the module into an image that's then deployable using WASME. So there's like the build concern. You can build in any language. So you can basically build the module either using a WASME supported language, or you can build your own module, which will include compilation. And then you can build the image from that and deploy the image. And this will all happen live. You'll use the CLI to do it, or there's a Kubernetes operator that WASME provides that you can use to do it declaratively. But basically, you can then deploy images to Istio or Glue that's installed in a Kubernetes cluster live without having to restart Envoy or redeploy anything. And today, what it's doing is it's pulling those images from the WebAssembly Hub. So the cycle is you build locally, push to the cloud, then you configure the cluster to pull. And the cluster will pull and attach the filter to the running Envoy on the gateway. Yeah, I think
Cool.
that covers it.
Yeah, and so with that, I'm really excited to have both Blake Covarrubias, Senior Product Manager from HashiCorp, and Bryant Hagadorn, Security Engineer from IBM. These two gentlemen have built a WASME module for Envoy and posted them. They are shared publicly in the WebAssembly Hub. I have links to their repos at the end of this presentation, so we'll send that out. But I now would like to let me stop sharing. Would love to give these gentlemen the opportunity to demo and talk about what they've built. So Blake, I'm gonna unmute you and make you a co-host. So I think that way you can share your screen. And then when you're done, I will give Bryant the ball so that he can share.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Betty. So yeah, let me share my screen. We'll kick things off. So just to set a little bit of context, this is the filter that I built. It's available on GitHub if you want to go look and find it and browse through the code. But this was really done as an exercise to learn about WASM, learn about running these modules inside of Envoy. I never done this before. I was curious, and so this is really just kind of a experimental proof of concept that I put together. It's not really something that you should use in production, but it did help me to learn and understand how things work. In the process of writing this, I did take the time to kind of comment all of the code in detail, so you can kind of see each of the function calls and where that, what those functions are kind of hooking into as far as the WASM spec, what's exposed via the ABI and what's being called. It's pretty good to follow and get a good grasp of what's happening. But what I built just to demo this is I built a sample application. This is a two-tier application that's running within Consul Service Mesh. And I'll get to the app in a second. What I have is I have a web front end that's deployed within the service mesh. And I have that front end is fronting a download server. I have 2 versions of this download server, V1 and V2, and I just deployed the second version ahead of time for the sake of time for the demo. But here's a scenario. So we go over to the app. This is an application which provides a media library. Say you can upload videos or any kind of media that you want and make those available to end users. So if someone wants to access something, they can just click on it, they get a download dialog, they can download that file. But say, this is publicly accessible on the internet, and now because it's publicly accessible, maybe it was posted on Hacker News or Reddit, a lot of people are downloading the content and my bandwidth costs are going through the roof. So I want to reduce and kind of control who can access these files. And my download server, which is serving these, maybe it's a application that I don't have either access to the code or can't easily modify that. And so what I will do is, instead of changing anything there, I'll implement these controls within WebAssembly in Envoy. So if I take a look here, going back to the service mesh view, sorry, let's just dive into, we have a sidecar proxy deployed for the web app. If I click into this, I can see that it has an upstream dependency on this download service. And then again, if I go back over to the download service, I've got the 2 versions running, V1 and V2. And what I currently have is I have a traffic splitter set up. All of the traffic is going to the V1 service instance of the application. So we saw, just a moment ago that those files are unprotected. If I want to protect those, what I can do, actually, before I dive into that, I do want to show what I'm using to deploy this in Consul. It's an alpha version of Consul. I have, the WASM module that I've built, and I am loading it from a file path and injecting that into my, Kate's YAML. So this is a regular deployment. And then when Envoy loads, it's loading this filter from disk. And so I want to then, move over to V2 of my service, which has this filter deployed. So I'm going to adjust this weight, switch 100% of the traffic over to the V2, and then I'll do a console config write service splitter. And now we're redirecting traffic over to that instance of Envoy with this WASM filter running, which if we now click on one of these resources, we see that now access to these files are unauthorized. Nothing would be accessible. So how do we gain access? So what this filter does is if we want to gain access, we can say, I want to access videos, wasm tutorial.mp4. And the app will spit back this URL with this hash kind of in between. And if I click on this, I now have access to the resource. What is this doing? How does this work? So what it does is, this is based off of a filter that's available within Nginx called Secure Link. I basically rebuilt and kind of re-implemented version for Envoy. And so what happens is you would take the request path of the resource you're trying to access and a shared secret, and you concatenate them together. So you end up with a resultant string that looks like this. And then you need to take that string and hash that using MD5. So here's an example of just doing that to CLI, and it'll return some hashed value. And then that hash needs to be inserted between the path which we are protecting, which in this case we've configured Envoy to protect this downloads directory. And then it needs to be inserted between the resource we want to access, which is this WASM videos tutorial. And so here's that, that URL, that value inserted. And again, now we have access to that resource. So then, these links can be distributed to, say, folks who have or want to give access to this media server, and not have other folks who are just coming across the link online, being able to download this content and obviously increase my bandwidth bills. So that's kind of, the example of what I built, maybe a use case of where you might use this. Obviously, the workflow of generating these URLs is a little rough, but hopefully you get the idea of what this is providing.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Blake. And again, we'll post the links to that if anybody wants to, take a look and play around with what Blake has built. So, and now, Bryant, I've made you co-host, so you can share your screen.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Really cool demo there, Blake. So I'll just kind of go into a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation on the kind of the problem that I was trying to solve. And like Blake, I was just pretty much just trying to play around with the tool set, the WASME tool set, see how it's similar to Docker Hub, and just kind of play around with the different functionalities that it gave. So at the time I was working on what's called security headers, and security headers are an OWASP kind of like best practice recommended. The way that they're kind of implemented is usually on a language by language basis. And basically what they do is they tell the browser how it can interact with the rest of the internet. So for example, some websites might request certain fonts or might request Bootstrap from a CDN. It basically allows the browser to actually grab those resources or restricts those resources. And the main kind of threat vectors that we're avoiding here would be, cross-site request forgery, cross-site scripting, those sorts of issues. So previously, the ways that you can set these response headers is through Nginx. Of course, you can alter your Nginx configuration. You just have these manual adding of headers, and it gets pretty messy pretty quickly, especially when you have a lot of different Nginxs attached at the Docker file level, at the ingress level, and of course, there's no egress with the Nginx ingress in Kubernetes. And then as well, you could do it inside of the actual language or the framework that's serving all of your RESTful calls. So here's how Express does it with Helmet, which is the one that I mentioned earlier. However, at the time, I thought it was kind of silly that there's all of these different language utilities. I think there's probably 30 or 40 different language ways to do this. I thought it was kind of silly, and it'd be neat if the actual Envoy sidecar proxy could respond with these request headers just kind of directly. So I'll go ahead and just show, I'm going to upgrade the book info example, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn it from like an F rating, from like kind of a standard security header rating service to a D rating. So it's not going to be much improvement. All right, so here I have just a simple book info sample running. I've just done all the basic steps on istio.io. It's running on GKE, and it's running on top of Istio 1.6, I believe. And you can see product page in my network request is returning these response headers. And you all might be wondering if I just left my Facebook open. I actually didn't. I can show you what a really, really mature website probably has inside of its response headers, and I'll show you how we maybe kind of get closer to that. So this is Facebook. You can see in their response headers, they whitelist everything, source files, script files, everything from their content delivery network, pretty much everything that they need, and they kind of really integrate the idea of least privilege. They have HTTPS upgrades, all sorts of things that the browser knows how to interact with, cross-site script protection, those sorts of things. So I'm just going to show you very quickly kind of the infrastructure I have set up. I have the WASME operator running. I have the CRDs running. I have Istio running just with the default settings. And then of course, book info, like I showed you with the sidecars injected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually show you the filter deployment that I'm going to actually deploy here, and then I'm going to just go ahead and apply it. So right here, this is it. This is pretty much one way of deploying the filter, and I'll just apply it. And to my understanding, what's happening here is that it's pulling the WebAssembly Hub filter down from WebAssembly Hub. and it's applying it to the Envoy proxy. And in this case, I think it's not going to hit any particular deployment of the pod. So it's actually going to hit everything that's in my current namespace. So I believe it'd be all the stuff that we saw earlier running in the default namespace. So all of book info would have this. Ideally, you'd probably want to only have this served to the UI. So now that I've applied it, let's go ahead and see if it actually worked. And I might need to just delete my pods real quick here and let them all kind of reboot. In the meantime, I'm going to throw this product page in here and scan the site for the current security headers that we're getting, and we can see that it's giving me an F. So definitely a lot to change here. And I think it's actually a 503, but I promise you before it definitely was an F. So let's go ahead and see here. So I can see the filter deployment here, and it's running. And I'm not sure if I need to delete.
Can you show the status on the filter deployment? Or the you could just do OYAML. Or does KDet status work? I don't actually know that.
We can find out right now.
I did. No, I think it just get the whole resource. Okay, status. No. Yeah, OYAML. Yeah, we actually have, there's a known issue right now. We have a fix waiting to get merged in.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a race, which causes this to flake.
All right, so my apologies. So I've actually updated my ASDO version, and I think it's not working with this 1.6.2. So apologies for that one. I think I updated it when I just spun up this cluster. But I'll take you to this Medium article that I wrote about this. Essentially what should happen is these 5 headers will get added to the request. And then if we were to go inside of securityheaders.com and check it, we'd see that some of these headers have been applied. So yeah, so it looks like it's just maybe an updated version of Istio that I've used here. So yeah, that's basically it. I'll definitely try to update that. Kind of the next steps, ideas I have for the project would be to dynamically load some of these values in, like whatever you're serving from Bootstrap, Google Fonts, storing the configuration inside of a secret or a config map, and then kind of applying least privilege automatically, so flagging violations as they happen, and then maybe automatically suggesting headers. I think headers can be really confusing to developers, so automatically suggesting them based on kind of what Envoy sees would be kind of the next steps. And then how to reach out.
Cool. Hey, Bryant, do you mind sending those slides to me? Because then I can, and so that I can share them with the folks at the meetup.
Okay, sure, yeah, sorry.
If you send them over, then I'll send those out along with a copy of the slides that we were using earlier.
Okay, definitely will do.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for the thank you so much for the demo. And so let me hang on. So the steps of share screen and present. Awesome. So we'll get that out. We'll get also the links to their repos out so everyone here can check out. And also both Bryant and Blake are also in the WebAssembly Hub channel inside the community Slack. So for, if you have questions as you're playing around with the filters, you can just go ahead and tag them and ask them questions too. So with that, transitioning a little bit to the community Q&A. So these were about 5 questions that came up. in the community Slack, and we wanted to use the opportunity here just to answer them more broadly so that everyone, because I think a lot of them are questions that they've been asked repeatedly, and so this would be good for everyone. So the first question here is, what kind of filters are possible besides header transformation? And so Yuval, would you like to answer this?
Yes, so Envoy lets you essentially, I'll separate it. So first, in the initial versions of the WASME interface, you couldn't really do much body manipulations. It was very early phases, but recently they've been adding this stuff in. So you can manipulate headers, you can manipulate body, response headers, response body, metrics. So for example, if you don't really care that much about, the request itself, but you just want to add a counter when you see a certain pattern, you can do that. You can interact with other services. So for example, when a request come in, pause it, call out to another HTTP service, and then based on the response, make a change to the request, deny it, something similar to XOT, for example. So just throwing a lot of use cases out there just to kind of explain what's possible.
Cool. So next question, and actually this came up as Bryant was demoing too. Is Istio 1.6 supported right now? And Shane, you want to comment on the work that's been going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is the current version of WASME doesn't support 1.6, but we are actively working to bring that support, and it should be coming very, very soon. Basically, because there's not like a hard cut release every time the ABI has breaking changes in Envoy WASM, we kind of have to build a compatibility matrix into WASME itself. So we just haven't added 1.6. I think as someone said in the chat, there's actually a couple of workarounds that work right now, but we're looking to bring official support pretty soon to this.
Maybe Tegan wants to share that workaround. Okay. So another thing here is we talk about WebAssembly being a way to kind of allow more than one language, more than using C++ to modify Envoy. Scott, do you want to comment on what kind of what languages are currently supported in in WebAssembly?
Sure. So Yuval would know the list of what Envoy supports natively better, like which ones have bindings. I believe.
Yeah, so upstream Envoy, I think the best supported language is C++. And then the upstream SDK also added Rust. And you can see them, Betty, maybe I can send you the link. Essentially, the goal with the WASM support is to also extend it more than just Envoy, also to other proxies. So there's a GitHub org for that purpose, and the C++ and SDK and Rust SDKs are there. And I can share that link later.
Okay, and then those could then get translated over into like WASME and WebAssembly Hub.
Exactly, and in addition, we added assembly script support, which was in Blake's demo, and another community member added Go support, TinyGo.
Yeah, actually, maybe that's we can add those links to this presentation as well when we send it out, just so people can check it out, because it's also a community project. The overall community is happy to share and play with things that other folks create, and then just based on popularity and interest, I think is how more things will get supported. All right, this is always a fun one because I think this happens a lot just in our space on, how do you pronounce some of the different things. So to the solo team here, how do you pronounce these?
I don't pronounce anything. I just type it in the terminal, personally. But I've heard WASME as a good pronunciation.
Yeah, so WASME for the second one on the that's the CLI tool, and then WASM, right?
WASM and WASM.
Yeah, WASM and WASME. So this question actually came up a couple of times. How do you communicate or send data between two filters?
So yeah, there's two ways depending on your use case. One sec, let me mute the noises in here. So if you want to share information just in the context of a single request, there's a function called set property, proxy set property, and proxy get property. And if you want to share something that's global to a global state that will, kind of like maybe a counter or something like that, there's a shared data. So get shared data, set shared data.
Cool.
So yeah, depending on the use case. I think most commonly a lot of times filter and Envoy can interact with each other. So for example, an auth filter can provide an identity, and then an Arabic filter will apply policy based on that identity. And they use a mechanism similar to that set property, shared property, where it's information only persisted for the context of the request.
And this is a good segue into, Yuval and I have been brainstorming on doing a kind of like a live demo series on Envoy, so that, Yuval can kind of dig into like how various things within Envoy work, and then provide provide lots of, demo-based instruction on like filters and, et cetera. So be on the lookout for that. And these kind of questions can also be answered there too.
Yes, I'm excited.
Maybe with live demo.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, so, and this next part on what's next is a couple of things. First is, Shane, if you could talk to the folks about kind of what's currently in development right now, and explain these a little more. And then the next one was, we had some open questions that we'd like to pose to the audience here. And then we can also have additional questions that folks on the phone have.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the three big things in WASM land that we're working on at Solo. So the first one is we're bringing WASM support to Glue Enterprise. Right now, it's only available on the open source version of Glue, but we've had a lot of interest from our enterprise clients as well. So that's coming very soon. We're also building a new release that's going to be built on a much newer version of Envoy WASM. Our current version is only about 6 weeks old based on the Envoy WASM master, but this stuff moves pretty quickly. So there's already been a few breaking changes that we're looking to fix up and get new versions of. And then Istio 1.6 support is the other big thing we're working on, which you already talked about a little bit, but hopefully we can get that on pretty soon as well.
Awesome, thank you. And so with that, outside of just general questions folks on the phone may have, and you're all able to unmute yourself pretty easily to unmute yourself and ask any other questions you may have. But some of the big things we wanted to ask the folks that were interested in WebAssembly is, what other languages are you most interested in outside of the ones that we've mentioned here? Are there other service meshes or just other Envoy-based tools that you're interested in using WebAssembly with? What's cool is Blake showed it working with Consul. So anything that's theoretically, any solution that's using Envoy can use, WebAssembly. Other kind of filters that people are interested in or thinking about, ideas that you may have. We have a few. We have a tutorial and demo on our site today in the docs. But if there's other things that people are interested in, and if you need some content or tutorial to help guide you there, we'd love feedback on that. Shane just mentioned how some of our Glue Enterprise customers had asked about, Envoy, having Envoy work with Glue Enterprise. We're curious to know if anybody else has been looking at using WebAssembly in their company for, actual business use, and thinking about outside of what other integrations or features are needed to have that be in kind of a more beyond kind of like a prototype use. So we were curious to understand these types of things. So, and anything else. So this is kind of open Q&A for folks. Silence. I'm just gonna unmute everyone.
Okay, so maybe I will start.
Yes,
We currently are working with Istio service mesh. The current approach was to implement an adapter to a mixer, which was the, I don't know how to call it, the old architecture of Istio. Since the Istio changed the architecture and there is no more mixer, or even mixer is now deprecated, we want to move to the WebAssembly and those plugins to Istio. We are most interested in, I would say, Golang, in this case, TinyGo, since our developers and our services are mostly written in Go. We are looking also for some features to WebAssembly Hub, since we saw that, for example, you cannot delete a tag that you pushed to WebAssembly Hub. And if you push something wrong, or you want to improve your tag, there is currently no way. And maybe a private version of WebAssembly Hub would be nice tool for us, since we are doing an enterprise project and not everything, we cannot share every plugin which we write. So these are, oh, and also we are looking for waiting for the support for the Istio 1.6, since we want to use the newest version. So this is the most we are most interested in those features.
Hey, Chris, question for you. Is this for your company internally, or is it for your clients that you're?
Company internally.
Okay, okay, cool.
Probably that's all from me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but from my side, it's everything. Thanks.
No, thank you for that. And have you seen the TinyGo, the user-driven TinyGo project on this?
Yeah, we
Okay.
saw that, but we also saw that it is not yet stable, and we didn't want to use something that is unstable. We firstly tried with assembly script, but there are some problems with support for Istio 1.6. And currently we are working on implementing some plugin with C++, and it seems that even with Istio 1.6 it's working.
Okay.
So you mean C++ in WASM or C++ in Envoy?
C++ in WASM.
Got it, makes sense.
Anyone else?
I just had maybe a quick question for the community. Anyone could maybe answer, but the scope of what these WASM models can do is pretty interesting and like super large. Does anyone like see it going against the design principles to integrate like a newer control plane component, say like an operator that maybe stores the shared data or stores some sort of state, and then it kind of regulates the different WASM modules that it connects to? Has anyone thought about any like kind of pseudo like control plane components that would integrate with these filters?
Yeah, it's actually funny you ask, because naturally it's Yuval here, by the way. Once you have a new data plane component, it's only natural to want the corresponding control plane component to manage it. So there's a few things you can do here. One, Envoy is in the process of adding something called filter config discovery service, which can allow you to delegate the filter config to a separate XDS server. So let's use an Istio, for example. I can have the Istio filter CRD inject the WASM filter, but instead of providing the config inline, I tell it, go get your config from that XDS server. And that will allow packaging a control plane component for it. And I think our vision was that a module will not only include the data plane component, but also the control plane component. You kind of can get both of them.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I think, you know, the ability to make a control plane, data plane, you know, something like similar to Istio very quickly with this tool chain is definitely extremely interesting.
Maybe
there.
one thing from my side also. The documentation. I know that this project is kind of new, and it's just starting. But I think there is many things that documentation doesn't contain, and currently writing any plugin in assembly script or C++ in WASM is kind of hard, I think, because many things are undocumented, and you need to take a look into the code of SDKs, and that's one thing I would say that could be improved, I think.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. I think our main challenge with providing stable documentation is that the code itself is not stable. So for example, as Shane said, between Istio 1.6 and 1.7, we already saw some breaking changes in the host SDK code. So this will something that will naturally improve over time, and especially once it gets upstream into Envoy and the API stabilizes. Otherwise,
Yeah.
a lot of churn.
I understand, because I know that's kind of new thing, and everyone is just trying to make first steps in WASM. By the way, do you know what will be the changes in the Istio 1.7? Because I was trying to search for some informations, but I didn't found any.
I'll defer to Shane.
Yeah, so we don't have a fully functioning tested end-to-end version yet, but you know, at a minimum, I think they changed the method signature on request headers and on response headers. They added an extra field in there, so there's a couple of things you need to update in your filter and your C++ code. But you know, it's basically just kind of build it against the latest and see what breaks is kind of the quickest way to debug down to what's changed.
Okay. Thank you very much for us for.
Sure. Yeah, and just kind of on that note as well, related. So we are, I don't know if this is going to change in the future, because these things change pretty quickly, but as of right now, you know, on that slide we said we're targeting the latest version of Envoy WASM, that we're targeting the exact same ABI commit release that the current alpha release of 1.7 for Istio is targeting. So there should be pretty good support for that as well when that comes out, hopefully.
Cool. Any other questions, comments, requests? Actually, and then between this and the next time we have another meetup, if folks, if anybody on this call gets inspired, and if you build a filter and share it, happy to have folks share and demo. I think that's one of the nice things about doing meetups like this, is to have people kind of share why they got interested, and then what they're trying to prototype, and then kind of walk through that process with everyone else. And a couple of links here. So we've got the WebAssembly, the WASME is open source. And so it's, if you find issues or if you have requests, like Chris, you had some, comments on if you needed certain things in documentation, or please go ahead and file an issue. That helps us to track. And then also there is the OCI image spec, if anyone's curious on how we're actually storing the modules and what the format of the modules themselves. And then a link to the Envoy WASM. It's not yet fully in upstream Envoy. It's kind of in a separate repo that this work has been going on. So if people want to check that out. And then we have links here to the filters from both Blake and Bryant. And Brian's blog. Thank you for writing that. Any other questions or comments from the group here today?
I think I would just add or kind of echo the other gentleman's statement about documentation. I wrote my filter using the assembly script SDK that you folks put out, and it was great to get started. But when I kind of wanted to use more advanced functionality, like I was looking to possibly use an HTTP call, it saw that that wasn't supported in the version that's published, I think, on NPM. There's some newer versions, but those weren't running under the proxy. There was just some issues from the development standpoint that I was kind of stumbling through. So I think just better documentation or a workflow description of how we could leverage the latest version of that SDK and what environments it's supported in, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Anyone else? As always, if you have a question that comes up later, slack.solo.io, if you're in there, if you're already in there, there's WebAssembly Hub as a channel. If you're not yet in there, go ahead, please join the community. We're all in there. Folks are asking and answering questions for each other, so it's a nice way to kind of connect. I will send out the recording as well as the slides and the additional links to some of the things that you've all mentioned as well on the languages and and other stuff, so that you all have it. And then if there's any other requests that come in as we go, just hit me up. You can DM me or any of the team here, or pop it into the channel. Thanks so much for joining today. Thank you, Blake and Brian, for sharing. See y'all next time.
Thank you, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.